Welcome to meeting number 15 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Natural Resources. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee is meeting on the study of creating a fair and equitable Canadian energy transformation. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of November 25th, 2021, and members can attend both in person and by Zoom. For everybody who's here, including witnesses, now that we're in session, there's no screenshots permitted and or photos. And as per the directive of the Board of Internal Economy on March 10th, 2022, all those attending the meeting in person must wear a mask except for members who are at their place during proceedings. And a few comments for members of everybody who's here. Please wait to recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, please click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when not speaking. For those on Zoom, there is a choice for interpretation of floor for English or French, and you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel, and all comments should be addressed through the chair. For anybody joining us virtually, if you'd like to speak to, please use the raise hand function, and I will do the best with the assistance of the clerk to figure out the speaking order should any hands be raised. I think today we have all of our regular members, and Mr. Morris, I'd like to welcome you to our group. Just before we get started with hearing opening statements, we need to adopt a budget for this new study because this is the first session, our first meeting of the new study. We've distributed a budget to everybody. The proposed budget is the amount of $11,925 to cover this study. It essentially covers the cost of phone lines and headsets required for our meetings. So is it the will of the committee to adopt this budget? Charlie? Okay, everybody's in agreement? Okay, we're good. And the second point is in order to get the lists of witnesses lined up for when we're back from our Constit weeks that are coming up after this week, we would like to we're proposing we have this Friday as the deadline for our witness lists. And so if everybody could, each of the parties could get your witness lists in for this study to the clerk by the end of Friday, it would be really helpful. So we'll have 2 weeks to get the panels organized. Would somebody be willing to make that a motion that we can then hopefully adopt? James, we'll have witnesses by this Friday. Is everybody in favor of that or supportive of it? Yeah, okay. So the clerk will send out the template and the request, and then if everybody could work with your respective teams and get your lists in as by the end of day Friday, that will be really helpful. So with that, we are now getting into the study. Oh, Larry.
Oops, yeah. Thank you. Just to that, we're all here, or many of us are here in the chamber now. Is there any talk about allowing witnesses to come to the chamber for witnesses? Be present?
We'll check with our clerk and see if there's been any. No, not yet. Oh, okay, apparently not yet.
Suggested it's 3 weeks from now before we'll have witnesses. So other than the ministers and today, so just throw it out there.
Okay, I'll check. I don't know if that's the Board of Internal Economy issue or who's making that decision. Yeah, I think for the budget we haven't included any travel at this point. Yep. So for this study, we may end up still doing primarily virtual, unless we have witnesses such as ministers in. But I hear your point. It would be nice to start seeing people in the room with us again.
That's all.
Mr. Angus, before we get into introducing...
Yeah, just quickly, I very strongly support my colleague. I think it's a real different dynamic in committee when we able to see witnesses, so I would ask if you could bring our concerns forward. And if they did agree to that, would that mean we'd have to adapt the budget if we are able to invite witnesses to come?
Yeah, so we would have to amend the budget we just approved. So we'll keep an eye, and I will express that to liaison committee. James.
Mr. Hall is having trouble getting into the meeting.
Okay, he is trying?
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll keep an eye out. Mr. Shahal is trying to join us. So we will get him in here. So anyway, this is the first hearing on the study on creating a fair and equitable Canadian energy transformation. For our panel today, we have the remainder of the time until 5:30 From the Department of Employment and Social Development, we have Andrew Brown, Senior Assistant Deputy Minister, Skills and Employment Branch, as well as Chris Bates, Director General, Apprenticeship and Sectoral Initiatives Directorate. And from the Department of Natural Resources, Debbie Scharf, Assistant Deputy Minister, Energy Systems Sector, Roizen Reed, Director, Energy and Environment Policy Division, and Jasmine Redenbach, Acting Manager, Energy and Environment Policy Division. So thank you to each of you. I assume that each of the departments will take 1 5-minute opening slot, and then we'll get right into our questions and answers. So from the Department of Employment and Social Development, who's going to do the 5-minute opening statement? Do we want to do a quick rock, paper, scissors?
Chair. It will be me giving the opening statement for ESDC, but I believe that my colleague from NRCan will be starting off today.
Oh, okay. I'm happy to go with that. So Natural Resources, we'll turn it over to you. And I have, you probably have been here before, quick card system. So I'll use yellow when there's 30 seconds left, red when the time's up. Don't stop mid-sentence, but wind up the thought. And that'll apply when we're into the questions and answers as well. So Natural Resources, I'll start the clock at 5 minutes, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Great. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me here today. I'm pleased to be speaking to you from Ottawa, the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe peoples. My name is Debbie Scharf, and as mentioned, I'm the Associate Assistant Deputy Minister of the Energy Systems Sector at Natural Resources Canada. The Just Transition is a policy approach that puts people at the center of the Government of Canada's climate policy. To date, the government's actions on just transition have focused on phasing out coal-fired electricity generation, which has had a major impact on workers and communities in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Nova Scotia, and Newfoundland. It led the government to commit $185 million in budgets 2018 and 2019 towards economic diversification and skills development initiatives. This funding seeks to strengthen communities affected by the transition away from coal power, enabling their residents to pursue meaningful careers and enjoy a high quality of life for generations to come. Today, the government is looking at the energy transition writ large, knowing that the world is moving to a low carbon energy model, and Canada has an opportunity to be an economic and innovative leader in a net zero future. But government climate policy is not the only driver. Smart investors know the opportunities of the future will need to be low carbon, and we're already seeing investments shift away from high carbon industries. So too, the energy transition ahead of us is not about phasing out any industry. It is about industries making changes, reducing carbon intensity, and finding new ways to adapt to the changing market. And finally, the impacts of the transition won't affect only one industry or segment of workers. Oil and gas workers may pivot to hydrogen, mechanics will learn about zero emission vehicles, construction workers will integrate the most energy efficient building codes. All this means that the just transition is about ensuring Canadian workers have the skills and training they need to seize the opportunities created by the energy transition. We know that some who work in high carbon industries may lose their jobs. But we also know that Canadian workers who built our current energy systems have the know-how, the ingenuity, and the work ethic to see them thrive in green energy jobs. And the government is doing its best to make sure those jobs are available. My department is supporting energy projects in every region of Canada, creating jobs through programs like the Greener Homes Grant, the Clean Fuels Fund, and our nuclear strategy. We are looking at economic diversification by supporting the opportunities unique to each region and each sector, whether it's hydrogen in the prairies, critical minerals in Quebec and Ontario, or biofuels in British Columbia. In fact, because the clean energy sector is growing faster than the economy overall, we see the potential for skilled labor shortages in a number of those areas, including nuclear, green mining, and energy efficiency. This means that we need to attract young people to careers in the natural resources sectors and break down systemic barriers that have kept women and racialized Canadians out of employment in traditional energy jobs. And that is why the government is committed to introducing a Just Transition Act, with my department having begun working with experts and stakeholders to support the development of the legislation. Last July, we launched public consultations with a broad range of stakeholders, including workers and labor organizations, industry, academia, non-government organizations, youth, and experts in skills, training, diversity, and inclusion. This is in addition to meetings with provinces, territories, and Indigenous organizations. To date, we have received over 17,000 submissions and are still accepting written submissions until April 30th. The proposed legislation will be guided by the feedback we receive from the consultation sessions and a What We Heard report, which will be published once they are complete. I look forward to sharing more information at this time and seeing the conclusions that this committee will reach after meeting with officials and stakeholders. As mentioned, I'm pleased to be joined by my two colleagues, Rasheen Reed and Jasmine Redenbach, and we're pleased at the right time to answer your questions. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And now we'll go back to the representatives from Employment and Social Development for your opening 5 minutes, and I'll just restart the clock here. Over to you when you're ready.
Great. Thank you, Chair. So Andrew Brown, Senior Assistant Deputy Minister for Skills and Employment Branch at Employment and Social Development Canada. And I'd like to begin by acknowledging that I'm participating in today's committee meeting from the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. And I'd also like to echo the sentiments of my colleague from Natural Resources Canada, Ms. Scharf. A key component of a just transition is helping Canadians have the skills and training they need to seize growing economic opportunities arising from Canada's ambitious goal of net zero emissions by 2050. And I'd like to elaborate on what ESDC is doing to support this from a workforce development perspective. While climate change will result in a number of employment challenges, the shift to a low-carbon economy will also provide exceptional opportunities to build an inclusive and skilled workforce to drive economic growth. As Ms. Scharf highlighted, Canada's clean energy sector is growing. In fact, this growth will continue to accelerate, doubling to approximately 640,000 workers by 2030. In addition to clean energy, other priority sectors related to the low-carbon economy include construction, natural resources, transportation, environment, and the emerging battery supply chain industry. Employers and workers across sectors and industries will require varying levels of support to develop the skills needed to seize current and emerging opportunities. Employment and Social Development Canada is committed to leveraging our existing skills and employment programming to train, upskill, and reskill workers to help ensure that Canadians can benefit from these opportunities, especially those from equity-deserving groups. The mandate for the Minister of Employment, Workforce Development, and Disability Inclusion includes 3 specific commitments to support the skills component of a just transition. First, to support the Minister of Natural Resources and the Minister of Labour in moving forward with just transition legislation. Second, to launch a Clean Jobs Training Centre to help workers across sectors upgrade or gain new skills to be on the leading edge of a zero-carbon industry. And third, to address gaps in training and upskilling to help ensure that all Canadian workers can take advantage of sustainable battery industry opportunities. Le ministère fait des progrès à l'égard de chacun de ces engagements.
The department is making progress towards each of these commitments. For example, we'll continue to support our colleagues at Natural Resources Canada throughout the stakeholder consultation process to move us closer to tabling a Just Transition Act in Parliament. We will also consult these subject matter experts on the development of the Clean Jobs Training Centre to help ensure a people-centered approach to this new initiative. In addition, the government announced a major new investment of $960 million in Budget 2021 for the new Sectoral Workforce Solutions Program. A key pillar of this program is to prioritize investments in building talent for the low-carbon economy across multiple sectors.
La conception et la prestation.
The program will support the design and delivery of training and human resources solutions that are relevant to the needs of businesses, especially small and medium-sized businesses, as well as help recruit and retain a diverse and inclusive workforce.
Round of a call of proposals for sectoral workforce solutions program in March and are currently in the process of assessing and prioritizing projects. Projects to address the skills needs for a just transition could begin as early as summer 2022. And in addition, Employment and Social Development Canada has a large suite of skills and employment programming, and we're currently exploring how these programs can be leveraged to support just transition and the implementation of Canada's new emissions reduction plan. So, given my time, I'll just sort of try to close up by saying I believe that addressing emerging labor shortages and equipping the workforce with new skills will be a critical enabling element of our collective actions on just transition, and I look forward to advancing the department's contribution on this important issue. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you for your opening statements to both departments. The first round, each of the four members will have 6 minutes. I always like to let the witnesses know, in case you have your stopwatch running, how long each session will go. So these are 6-minute rounds, and we're going to be starting with Mr. McGuire. So, Mr. McGuire, over to you for your first 6 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the witnesses for being here today to start this new study. I have a number of questions, and I'm going to be asking for some information. So I'll get right at it. I'm deeply concerned about the negative impact of the government's policies on oil and gas sectors. So, you know, the government makes any further, before they go and make any further decisions, it's imperative that we get a sense of the direction of the direct and indirect jobs directly related to the oil and gas sector. And so I'm wondering if you could table with the committee, please, any information you have on how many current jobs are either directly or indirectly or indirectly related to the oil and gas sector, broken down by provinces. And I also, you know, Mr. Chair, I could go through these, or is there a comment on that as well? I'm assuming they can provide that.
Hello, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the question. This is Debbie Sharp here. At this point in time, that level of detail, and given where we are with the emissions reductions plan and the decisions that come ahead, that's not a question that I could answer at this point in time. I would like to point out that the emissions reduction plan did set a sector by sector approach to looking at emissions reductions between now and 2030, and it provided guideposts to action for which the government has indicated it will consult, in particular on an oil and gas cap. So I think there's some more work ahead of us to be done to see how that's going to be designed and rolled out.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I find it kind of through consternation, I guess, that this information isn't available. I mean, we have to have a base to start from, so I'm going to ask them to provide as much detail as they can on that breakdown by provinces. Thanks. And also, we've heard about the Indigenous witnesses on how oil and gas sectors creating wealth and prosperity in their communities, and so I was wondering if they could table with the committee any information you have on how many current jobs are either directly and indirectly related to the oil and gas sector in Indigenous communities, which is very, very important because there's many jobs created and dependent in those areas on these sectors as well. If they could include that, Mr. Chair.
If anyone has any responder or insight, otherwise we'll see if whatever information can be provided after.
That would be wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I can supply this to the clerk later too,
Sure. Yeah,
Mr. Chair, but the government announced that all new vehicles produced in Canada after 2035 will be electric. For this transition to happen, we know Canada must produce a tremendous amount of new electricity and build a necessary infrastructure. So can we table to the committee the following, the modeling on how much more electricity is needed to meet this demand or will be needed, the modeling on the sources of that extra electricity generation, the cost to the government and to consumers to generate this electricity, and the cost to governments and consumers to build community and personal generating stations. Having had some time on the Standing Committee of the Parliamentarians for the Arctic region, I think it's quite pertinent that we look at what can be done for these situations in those communities, and not necessarily them. There's others, small communities throughout the country as well. So I'd ask for the information on those 4 areas as well. The fourth area is that Canada has an abundance of critical minerals, and we still rely on countries for import of critical minerals for electric batteries and other clean energy technologies. So can you please table with me with the committee a full list of how much and from which countries are the following critical minerals imported into Canada for the past 5 years? And that would include copper, cobalt, nickel, lithium, chromium, zinc, aluminum, and I won't name them all, Mr. Chair, but there's 17 rare earth minerals as well that are quite important.
Point of order. I'm just curious about, like, I thought we were talking about sustainable jobs and a just transition, and I'm a little confused at this point about what this has to do with workers and regions in our community. So just perhaps if I could have a little bit of help to understand that.
I've stopped the clock. I wasn't sure if it was a point of order, but I think the member has the ability to answer or ask questions. I don't know what kind of list you have here, Mr. McGuire,
Just a few more.
If the officials want to make any comment on the list of things, and the officials then will be invited to supply whatever information they can, and we'll see if there's any relevances of the analyst write the report on the information that's being requested. It's
Sure.
no, it's your time, and I'll restart the clock.
Okay,
So
that's all right.
I'd stop it. So you still have a
Okay,
minute
thanks.
45 left. So back to you.
Yeah, no, I'm glad to answer that. It's just, as I said in my opening comments before the question started, is for this information, it's just to get a base information, and I'm asking for any information that is available. If it isn't available, well, we'd look at that. But so I would ask as well if they could please table any information with the committee on how many tons of these minerals I just listed are produced in Canada every year and broken down by provinces. There has to be that available through, I think, the provincial areas as well, and I'm sure there's an accumulation of it at some point. And can they please table with the committee the aggregate and fulsome list of funding since the fall of 2015 that the government has provided in support of research and development of small modular nuclear reactors as well? Because those are the ones that I was talking about in regards to some of the remote areas of Canada, and we need to know a base of where we're at before as the study moves on. And just two more, Mr. Chair. We know there is a shortage of Red Seal tradespeople in Canada. That's been talked about. We know there will be a demand for tradespeople for the development of green technology. And so can they please table with this government, a list of projected Red Seal trade skills needed to meet the expected demand for this just transition? And the last one, Mr. Chair, is Canada's in the top 10 oil and natural gas producing countries in the world. We have some of the highest environmental and labor standards in the world, and it provides hundreds and thousands of jobs. The sector contributes over $100 billion to Canada's GDP. So to the best of the knowledge, have any of the other 9 top producing energy countries, the United States, Saudi Arabia, Russia, China, Iraq, Iran, UAE, Brazil, and Kuwait in the world implemented an emissions cap for their oil and gas sectors? And that's maybe one they could answer now.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're out of the 6 minutes there at this point. So you've been able to put forward many requests for information. We'll work with the clerk. We can actually send that out to the participants here today and see if you have information that is able to be shared. And if anybody wants to pick up any of this, you'll have other opportunities as we go around today in the remaining time in the meeting. So with that, we have next Ms. Jones. Over to you, and you have 6 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank our guests that are before the committee today, and thank you for your opening comments. I also want to say to my colleague who just asked questions that the critical mineral study that was released do have a lot of the information in it in terms of mineral production, quantities, export. So a lot of that information is in that report as well. So I just wanted to point that out. My colleague talked about the impact on jobs. We know that in a just transition, there's going to be new opportunities and new jobs. I'd like to focus on that as well. We know that in transitioning with energy, it means transitioning with jobs and employment. And we have to be very proactive to protect Canadians to ensure that they can make this transition and they have the skills they need to do it. So I'd just like to ask, what sectors are you predicting where there will be the greatest employment opportunities and growth, and I think in identifying these sectors, we get a very good picture of where some of those jobs are going to be and what the skills are that will be required. And whichever would like to go first, please. Probably Mr. Brown.
Great, and thanks for the question. Now, I'm just sort of looking at Chris there. I'm wondering if you want to jump in on that.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. So we are looking at different sectors. So, and as pointed out earlier by the other member, certainly some of the trades will be severely impacted. But we're kind of looking at it from like we think all sectors will be impacted with differing degrees. So some sectors, workers in those sectors will require small skills upgrading to adjust to changes in their jobs, whereas other sectors will have transformational changes to their jobs. So with completely new skill sets required, and then others will need to look at, so sectors like transportation could be have impacts. Certainly in the environment sector will have impacts, the oil and gas, and as we transition to a hydrogen economy as well. So that sector will have impacts as well. And maybe some of the NRCan colleagues that we have here might have additional details as well.
Well, perhaps one of the things that I would mention is there's actually a number of studies that have been done that look at the type of growth that could be expected from the clean energy sector, which includes a number of the things that a number of the areas that my colleagues from ESDC just mentioned, from the production of clean energy like clean hydrogen or biofuels to the production of clean electricity, zero emission vehicles. These are all the types of sectors of trades, of course, for energy efficiency. But I would point out there are some fairly large studies that have looked at this, both from Clean Energy Canada, projecting a 2.5% growth year over year over the next decade in the clean energy sectors, as well as the Royal Bank of Canada looking at an analysis projecting 235 to 400,000 new clean energy jobs by 2030. So these studies are certainly interesting to look at as well. And certainly as you're thinking about who you'd like to bring forward in your future meetings to be able to unpack that question in more detail for you.
Yeah, no, that's good information, and I'm sure our committee will certainly entertain to do that as well. When you were talking about creating a just transition advisory body, and I guess, in helping us as a committee move forward with our study, what would this advisory body do? What is it you guys are seeing as their role? And what would be the relationship between them and the net zero advisory body that is already that we're looking at as well? So, I don't want people or the public to be bogged down with all of these committees. So understanding what their role is and working with industry, working with unions, working with provinces and territories, and of course, Indigenous governments, will give us a better understanding in the work that we're going to undertake in the next few weeks as well.
So Debbie Sharp here. Thank you for that question. So what I would first start by saying is right now we're undergoing consultations on what could be in a just transition legislation. So we have a discussion paper out where we're proposing a just transition advisory body, but certainly what we hear from Canadians could influence and refine some of the thinking in that space. So I just wanted to put that caveat out there when I describe what we're proposing the just transition advisory body, if one were to proceed, could do. But we see this as a body that could provide ongoing advice to the government on the type of regional and sectoral strategies and actions that would need to take place in the years to come, as number one, and number two, to play a consultative role to help keep the social dialogue going. In this particular area, social dialogue with Canadians is important to keep going. So those are the two types of functions. In terms of the Net Zero Advisory Body, very quickly, this body provides advice on the pathways to net zero. A Just Transition Advisory Body could be providing advice on the types of actions we need to take to build sustainable jobs and the right skills for Canadians to meet the pathways to net zero.
And that's the end of your time, Ms. Jones. So
Okay,
we're
thank you,
going to
Mr.
go
Chair.
right now to Monsieur Simard.
Merci.
Thank you very much. I have a quick question for Ms. Scharf. In her presentation, she said that currently the ministry is working on a just transition law, and there are three main areas, but I know that you don't throw yourself into this kind of act without already having some principles that inform your work. So I'd like her to give us more information on the principles that will inform the ministry's work on this act. Thank you very much.
Say is that we are proposing, and as outlined in the discussion paper that was released, a series of just transition principles that could be outlined in legislation that would guide government decision making on these issues and in the context of climate change. These were informed by international guiding principles by the International Labour Organization as a starting point, and for which we are seeking feedback. If you'd like to have a little bit more detail on what those principles are, I'd like to turn over to my colleague, Rasheen Reed, who can give a little bit more detail on the principles.
Thank you. So on the principles, I'll repeat Debbie's caveat earlier that these will, of course, be informed by the feedback from our ongoing consultations with stakeholders and partners. But we tried to look at the ILO's guidance document on just transition and come up with some principles that would complement what they're telling us is the best practices. So the first one that we have is that we would continue an adequate, informed, and ongoing dialogue on a people-centered just transition, which would engage all relevant stakeholders to build strong social consensus on the pathways to net zero. The second one would be that policies and programs in support of a people-centered just transition must create decent, fair, and high-value work designed in line with regional circumstances and recognizing the different needs, strengths, and potential of communities and workers.
Merci.
Thank you very much. That's not exactly what I wanted to hear. I used to be a university professor, and if a student had told me that we're starting a project with very vague principles, and I think that would be unsatisfactory. I think that when I talk about principles that must frame this just transition, I would like you to tell me what you mean by transition. For me, transition, that supposes that you have to reduce our dependency on oil and gas. But what I see in the government action is just trying to find vague solutions. A number of witnesses have testified before the committee. You're looking for solutions to increase the production of oil, but reducing intensity. And I would like to know, in your work to prepare this transition, is the idea of the principle of transition implies a reduction in oil use, but also investing in finding new jobs for those who will probably, unfortunately, left behind. Is that part of what you're doing?
So this is Debbie Scharf here. Thank you very much for the question. So what I would say around the transition is just to lay this marker is how we get to the transition to the net zero economy. There are multiple pathways to get there. So we can't say upfront it will be five tablespoons of this and 3 tablespoons of that. There are multiple pathways. we know what those pathways are. We have an understanding of what it will take to get there, but there are multiple pathways. And so when we think about the just transition, perhaps I'll elevate three concepts for you that I think are really important. The first is that you want to support workers to have the right skills for the types of jobs that are going to be emerging in the clean energy economy. Number two, you want to have an inclusive economy, which means you want to break down barriers so that all Canadians can participate in the workforce, including those who have historically been marginalized. And number three, when there are communities or workers that are impacted, that you find ways to minimize those impacts. So those are three types of aspects of just transition that are important to consider in the context of the net zero transition.
Yes, I understand, but I'm still not really too satisfied with that answer. I think that when we talk about a just transition, I think it's vague, but is there any ratio that exists, or can you calculate a ratio between the jobs in the gas and oil sector and the support jobs related to this network, to this sector? Because I'm thinking about the study on the Emission Reduction Fund, which showed the Environment Commissioner showed that the amounts invested had not attained the objectives provided for in the program. And I would like to warn you that this is not supposed to be some kind of an action just to whitewash what you're doing without really reflecting on the effects that will be lived by workers. A just transition is to think about the workers and not just the oil companies. And this is what we're talking about in having a robust economy. Who's the most important, workers or the companies?
To pick that up, or if anybody wants to respond at that point. Now we're going to move over to Mr. Angus, and you got your first 6 minutes, Mr. Angus.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for your participation in this very important study. I come from Northern Ontario, and I've seen what transition is when it's unjust. We lost all our silver and iron jobs in my community. They never came back. When Elliott Lake went down, we knew what was happening. We knew the mines, the dates they would close. We knew where we were going to be to the very last mine. It was devastating, but it was focused. This is much more complex. And Ms. Scharf, I wanted to just ask you a bit about that complexity, because you said that this transition is not about, quote, phasing out any industry. It is about finding new ways to adapt to the changing market. So would that be saying that part of the natural resources department's plan is working on supporting exports for oil and gas, as the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers have suggested?
So what we're trying to do with the just transition is to engage Canadians in understanding how to put together a plan, an approach, a set of principles that will help guide decision making in the future, regardless of which type of clean energy pathways take us to net zero. When we understand that there'll be opportunities and there'll be impacts.
Sorry, just because it's about changing markets. I don't want to be rude, but I only have the 6 minutes. But to adapt to changing markets. So it has been suggested to us that exporting to the global south or exporting with competitors would be one of those approaches. So is that part of what you're factoring in?
As I said previously, there are going to be many different approaches to get to net zero, many different pathways, which I know the committee is well aware of, from clean energy production, zero emission vehicles, energy efficiency. And those pathways are going to depend on the choices that are made globally by other countries, as well as the choices that are made by Canada. And so we have to be ready for that. And we have to understand how to adapt our workers to be able to have the right skills at the right time for the jobs of the future.
Okay, thank you. Canada's energy regulator says that even factoring in carbon pricing and others, that we're looking at a 1.2 million barrel a day increase in the coming years. Would that be something that your department has factored in terms of the transition?
So what I can say from a just transition perspective, what we're trying to do right now is to consult Canadians and to hear from as many Canadians as possible about the approaches that we want to take to guide the decisions we have to make in the future around how to have an inclusive and equitable future for workers.
I get that. I just don't know that you need to be asking the ordinary Canadian whether or not we're on track to make 1.2 million barrels a day. That's something that the industry would know. So have you factored that in? That's what our regulator is saying. Is that something that's part of your planning?
Our planning is focused on the question around just transition. It's focused on talking to workers and Canadians across the country around how we can create a fair and equitable future for everyone. So that's really what we're focused on in these consultations.
I get it. I'm there with you. I'm just trying to get a sense of we're factoring in the economics here. Today, the IPCC released its latest report, and it says, quote, "It's now or never to avert irreversible climate breakdown." And they're saying the greenhouse gas emissions must peak by 2025. That's 3 years. And that they say this is a final warning to government. That's a game changer. I mean, that's right out of that Netflix movie about the comet. Has the government factored in that quick of a response that we have to make on the international stage to avert a climate catastrophe?
So listen, there's definitely a scientific and economic imperative around reducing emissions, and the emissions reductions plan was announced just last week around how to address climate change and meet our 2030 objectives. And to your question, there is no question the oil and gas sector is one important contributing sector, a quarter of the emissions in Canada in 2019 coming from that sector. And the emissions reduction plan provides a guidepost for how we're going to go forward, a blueprint for how we're going to go forward, and guide actions to develop an oil and gas cap with consultation with stakeholders and others to get there.
Thank you. The UN Secretary General Guterres said that governments and businesses are, quote, lying in claiming to be on track to limit the damage to 1.5. And I'm certainly not suggesting you're the one who's doing that, but based on what your department's seen, there is no way from looking at Mr. Guilbeault's plan that we are going to meet what the IPC is saying. Mr. Guterres is saying governments and businesses are failing us. So would that mean a revision based on the IPCC? Or let me put it this way, I'm going to follow up on my Conservative colleague. Would it be a report as devastating as this? Would that be something that you would have an analysis of? Would you undertake an analysis of this to see whether or not Mr. Guilbeault's and the government's plan is anywhere close to being able to meet it? And if you don't have a plan or a response to that, why not? And if you do, would you share it with our committee?
What I can say is that the Government of Canada has released its emissions reduction plan just last week with an approach
But then this
to how
report
we're going
came
to
out
get to
just
2030.
this week, so wouldn't it be reasonable, being that we're talking about the future of our planet, that you guys would do an analysis so we can know whether we're going to make this or the comet is going to definitely hit us?
If you'd like to take a few seconds to respond, I'll give you the ability to do that. Or we're out of time on this one. I'm happy to move on to the next speaker as well. Okay, we'll leave it there, Charlie, with your 6 minutes. We're going to go now to 5 minutes to Mr. McLean.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm going to ask my questions today. First of all, to the NRCan representatives here, and I believe that's Ms. Scharf. In July of 2021, NRCan did a consultation paper on people-centered just transition. So July in 2021. Parliament was not sitting, and Parliament ended in August of 2021. So no politicians, no public officials that are elected had any input on this study. And yet you're confident that that paper you came out with actually had the input of Canadians. It was open a very short period of time. Can you please explain, number one, the timing? And number two, if you can table that in the House of Commons as far as its thinness of input from what you've received.
So in July 2021, we launched the consultation around the just transition legislation. I may ask my colleague Rasheen Reed just to confirm the document in question is in fact the discussion paper that was released. Yes, so it was in fact the discussion paper that was released. So the discussion paper was really to prompt discussion and engagement with a whole host of Canadians and stakeholders around what should be in the legislation. So that is the purpose that it played, and it continues to be in the public domain, and we continue to seek input from Canadians. We've received over 17,000 submissions so far. The comment period is open until the end of April, and in addition,
So let's go into that then, Kate, because it's a little deeper than the question we have time for here. Let's ask about that 17,000, because when you wrote this document on March 30th, it was 16,000. So you're saying there's 17,000 individual types of responses, or are there a bunch of form letters you're getting in your office?
I'm going to pass that over to Rasheen Reed, who will be able to comment on that, please.
Yeah, so there are a number of form letters and letter writing campaigns that are a part of that number.
Thank you. That's all I wanted to know, and I appreciate the quick response. Back to you, Ms. Scharf, because I think there's a few other things you want to address here. Part of the transition vulnerable sectors we're talking about here account for, I'm told, 70% of Canada's goods exports that we're talking about. So this employs over 800,000 Canadians, and somehow we're going to price ourselves at a disadvantage to our competition here in some respects. How do you think we're going to have an export economy if we continue to drift this way? We don't have in Canada closed borders here at this point in time. So how will this affect our export industries?
Well, perhaps what I can say is that the government of Canada is making quite a number of strategic investments, many billions of dollars. In fact, there's been a number of different numbers quoted, from the $9 billion in the most recent emission reductions plan to the $100 billion in previous plans. And these investments are to help the clean energy economy get built up, other natural resource sectors to be part of the net zero economy, and to strengthen those sectors and to create jobs. So there are quite a number of investments being made across the country to help build those clean energy systems and to help Canadians use clean energy.
Thank you very much, because one of the things you talk about here is sustainability. So let's talk about a sustainability from an economic perspective. Number one, we're going to give up our export business in Canada. But sustainability, every one of these $100 billion you're talking about, the government continues to throw money at, is money that comes from the taxpayers. And sustainability means that eventually these jobs will have to pay for themselves. Right now, none of these jobs pay for themselves, and they're continually subsidized both at the production level and at the consumption level by the government of Canada. How do you think this is sustainable going forward?
So all I can say is, look, there are investments being made to build important industries that are going to be part of the net zero future. And the work that we're doing on the just transition is to help make sure that we have the right workers in place for the jobs that are going to be there and available.
Because you'll realize they're mostly in provincial jurisdiction that we're talking about, number one. So, you're allocating money, but at the same time, you haven't actually looked at where they're going to be affected province by province. So there's some holes in what you're doing here. You're already allocating money without, as my colleague pointed out earlier, actually indicating where that money might be spent or on what sectors. So a little macro before you're actually dealing with the details here first. But I'm going to echo what my colleague, Mrs. Jones, said, in that we're actually looking at so many consultations here with the public of Canada. They are confused with what you're actually doing with this government here. You've got how many different levers you're pushing on the Canadian people. What business is looking for government to do here is provide some kind of balance, some kind of actual base going forward here, and something business can say, this is what the landscape looks like going forward. Any comment?
Look, there is an emissions reductions plan.
You can finish your thought there, okay, and then we'll move on to our next speaker.
There is an emissions reduction plan that was released last week, which provides a blueprint for how we're going to get to 2030. So there is information around the types of actions and activities that are going to take place and the types of questions that still need to be answered. And the Just Transition consultation will help support that by understanding how to bring the jobs, the workers, and the communities to where they need to be as we move to net zero.
Great, thank you. We're going to now move to Ms. Lapointe, and you'll have the floor for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you. My question is to Mrs. Scharf. So we know that there are other countries that have, and regions that have already implemented just transition policies, and some are considered best practice. has the Government of Canada consulted those jurisdictions and reviewed their policies?
Thank you for the question. So in fact, we have looked at a number of other countries, including the ones that are leading and the ones that are taking more concise or more narrow approaches to the just transition. There are many on the list, from Scotland to the EU, to the UK, Germany, and absolutely we have looked at those. And in fact, some of them are quite leading or world leading, in particular Scotland. And we've taken a cue from some of the things that they've done to try and bring it into our thinking here in Canada. So we're absolutely aware of what's happening internationally.
And what are some of those implemented policies from those countries that are demonstrating measured positive outcomes?
I'm going to turn that over to my colleague Rasheen Reid, who perhaps can speak about Scotland or some of the other leading jurisdictions for some lessons learned.
Thanks, Debbie. So Scotland has included a set of just transition principles to guide their government's climate action in their climate change legislation, similar to sort of what Canada is looking at doing with the proposal that we have put forward in our discussion paper. They've also established a Just Transition Commission, which was mandated to undertake broad consultations and social dialogue. That was established in 2018, and it just recently released its final report to the Scottish ministers in March of 2021. And they proposed 24 different recommendations for government to sort of constitute a framework for government policies and actions on just transition. It's been fairly well received by the Scottish public, and it has been supported by the what they call their Just New Deal, which came out in 2020, which is a £3 billion package of investments from the Scottish National Investment Bank in order to attract more finance to clean energy industries.
My next question is for Mr. Brown. In your opening statement, you mentioned two items that I would like to get some more information on and some details. One is the Clean Jobs Training Center, and the other is the Sectoral Workforce Solutions Program. So can you inform this committee on those two initiatives?
Sure, thanks for those questions. And I think, first of all, just to mention that, of course, there are some existing programs in place that we would be looking at making use of and really leveraging to support workers who would be affected through just transition. But we're also taking a look exactly at those programs, the Sectoral Workforce Solutions Program, as well as the Clean Jobs Training Center. So I think, first off, to say that the Sectoral Workforce Solutions Program is well placed to contribute to a just transition as it supports key sectors of the economy, including sectors linked to the low carbon economy, and to implement solutions to address current and emerging workforce needs through training and upskilling initiatives. It will also help workers to transition from sectors in decline to high growth sectors. And I think one of the things that's important is that those eligible to apply for the Sectoral Workforce Solutions Program funding include a range of sectoral stakeholders, including for-profit and non-profit organizations, Indigenous organizations, provinces and territories as well. In terms of speaking about the Clean Jobs Training Center, perhaps I could turn things to Chris Bates.
Sure. So just quickly on that, we're really at the early stages of working on the implementation of that commitment. We're consulting stakeholders through NRCan's Just Transition consultations, as well as other stakeholders looking at how we can support different courses and training opportunities with a focus on equity deserving groups to make sure that they can be part of Canada's Just Transition.
Thank you.
We're going to now go to Mr. Simard, who has 2.5 minutes.
Merci.
Thank you very much. Ms. Scharf, there was an answer you gave me earlier that I didn't quite understand when you said one of the principles that is to have a robust economy. I quite agree, but I have the impression that the relative weight of workers in these efforts will be much less than the priority given to companies. So I'd like to know from you, who did you invite? Did the ministry invite these stakeholders? An invitation from the department. I'm not really talking about the consultations you've held. Have you heard these types of stakeholders within the context of your project on a just transition? And what stakeholders did you invite?
I'm going to turn that question over to Rasheen Reed to speak to.
Yeah, we've had 2 sessions so far with labor representatives because we do believe that they are an important part of representing workers and the interests of workers in the new economy. So our first meeting with them was with national unions, and then our second meeting was with provincial federations of labor.
And in the future, will there be people from the gas and oil sector who will be invited? And there was a quotation that I read today from the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Guterres, who said that often environmental defenders are seen as radicals, but it's more radical to increase petrol and oil. And this is a foolish thing. And I agree with that because over the past 15 years, social movements, environmental movements are very rarely listened to by the federal government. But we know that there is a very strong lobby from the gas and oil industry, which is always heard by the federal government. And will your just transition be really just, or will it be affected by leaning towards the oil and gas sector?
Wants to make a brief comment. You're welcome to, but we are out of time on this one, and I want to make sure that we get through as many of the rounds as possible.
Perhaps the only thing that I will say is that we are committed to consulting with a broad range of Canadians. This is an area where social dialogue is important, and therefore we're taking the maximum opportunity to meet with the maximum number of people or engage the maximum number of Canadians possible through various means.
Great, thank you. And now, Mr. Angus, over to you for 2.5 minutes.
I think one of the things that's really important to recognize is the transition is happening. And it can either be a clear transition or it can be a chaotic transition, because particularly in oil and gas, it is a very complex industry with the workers are very different. What you've got with upstream, with many of them fly-in contract workers, they might work 7 months of the year and then not work the rest. You've got midstream, looking after pipelines. The downstream value-added jobs, those are jobs that they're going to be there for a long time no matter what happens. Construction, we've already seen a real loss, and construction was driving a lot of the Western boom for so long. So, Mr. Brown, I guess I'm going to ask you, I've been in the IBEW training center in Edmonton. They've been training their workers for years. They've been saying, we're ready for transition. Where's the government? Are you willing to work to make sure that these worker-trained centers are able to train workers while they're still employed, so that if there is a bump or they start to make the transition, they can make the choice to make the transition. They don't have to wait till the transition hits them.
Great, thanks for that question. I wonder, Chris, if you can help out in terms of responding there, and I'm thinking about some of the other work that's going on with unions as well in terms of preparing workers.
Yeah, for sure. So I think that's exactly what we're trying to do with ESTC programming, is actually look at some of our current suite of programming and how we can do that. So we have a union training and innovation program already existing. And one of the things that we recently did with that is put a priority on purchasing equipment and materials that support the development of environmental skills in the Red Seal trade. So that's already looking at putting equipment in the hiring halls that people would be able to train on. That's more.
I got to interrupt because I only have 2.5 minutes, and I sort of wanted to just augment that, because the issue that happens with transition is that the workers aren't able to transition to get trained until they've lost their jobs. And that's when the devastation happens. Are you willing and are you putting in place now so that workers can, through their union, get training to upgrade so that they can move out of that sector if they so choose? And then the other issue is them being able to get their certification, because a lot of people come into the industry and work their way up. Some of them don't have certification to be able to move. Can they get that now so that we're not waiting until a site goes down?
If somebody wants to respond briefly, I'll give you a bit of time here.
So super quick, exactly. I think that's what we're trying to do, is recognize that some workers only need a certain amount of skills to upgrade or transition to certain jobs because they're already building off the existing skill sets that they have. And that's what we're trying to do through both the union training and innovation program, as well as through the sectoral program, is not ask people to go back to school for a huge length of time, but build off the skill sets that they have so that they can actually be successful in making transitions as we transition to a low carbon economy.
Great, thank you. Now we're going to move to Mr. Bragdon, and Mr. Bragdon, you have 5 minutes for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and it's an honor to be here with each of you and all the witnesses. I think it's the first opportunity to kind of ask some questions in the Natural Resources Committee, so I count it as an honor, and on behalf of many of the workers from coast to coast who have huge concerns about their employment and the future of their employment opportunities going forward. And I just want to go back to a point. I'll ask Ms. Scharf this. To the best of your knowledge, have the 9 other top producing energy countries, namely the United States, Saudi Arabia, Russia, China, Iraq, Iran, the UAE, Brazil, and Kuwait in the world, implemented an emissions cap for the oil and gas sectors? Are you aware of that? Yes or no?
Unfortunately, I don't have information to be able to answer that question, but it's certainly something we can come back to the committee with afterwards.
Yeah, I think it's pertinent for us to know what other jurisdictions and energy-producing nations are doing on that front and what measures they're putting in place. Because we do know that, I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that recently in a neighboring jurisdiction, they actually saw an increase in energy production in recent years, increased their exports, actually increased their capacity for energy development, while at the same time reduced their carbon footprint in comparison to our own country in a similar period of time. Is that true or not true?
The question isn't specific enough. I'm not sure what jurisdiction you're referring to, but we could certainly come back with that information if you provide a bit more specificity.
Well, my understanding, and I think it's public, Ms. Scherf, is that the United States actually in recent years had increased their energy output, had become energy independent, is my understanding, and exported more, but at the same time reduced their carbon footprint at a greater rate per capita than what Canada has over the last 6 years. So I would love to see the research on that and what information and data the government may have collected in regards to that, or the department. So if you can get back to us, that would be most appreciated. Thank you. Also like to ask, what are the key risks of this low carbon transition, in particular towards our rural communities? Our rural communities are facing increased challenges with this transition. As we know, disproportionately with the implementation of the carbon tax, it disproportionately affects those living in rural communities and small towns. What does this transition mean to jobs in our rural communities across the West and throughout the country, and including in my region, Atlantic Canada, like Newfoundland? What does this mean for jobs in rural communities? Has there been consideration for that?
So I think this is one of the aspects that we're looking to understand as part of the Just Transition consultations, coming back to the types of issues that we're trying to cover, which is around how do you get the right workers for the right jobs? How do you make sure inclusive for all Canadians, which includes both those living in the city and those in rural and remote communities? And how do you minimize the impact on workers and communities? And in particular, there are communities that rely on certain types of industries that perhaps could be impacted by the net zero transition. So all of these issues are part and parcel of what it is we'd like to hear from Canadians about to help shape where we go on the Just Transition legislation and the actions after that.
Well, I think in the context of this and the Just Transition, what we're hearing, it seems, I know I'm hearing increasingly so from Canadians with what's happening geopolitically and internationally. There is a desire to get more Canadian energy to world markets, to displace dictator oil and dictator energy with good democratic energy that is produced under some of the most stringent of environmental regulations in the entire planet. I think Canadian energy sector has a great story to tell. And yes, we're for all the above, and we're all for transitioning and having good, clean technologies emerge. But in the meantime, and for the foreseeable future, it seems like the world is desiring energy and needs energy to function. Would it not be good for our plans to envelop and incorporate continued production of Canadian energy and getting those products to markets and protecting jobs in our rural communities across the country? Is that not worthy of consideration?
So at Natural Resources Canada, and the government has made significant investments in clean energy. I can point you to programs like the Clean Fuels Fund, which is helping to de-risk investments in clean fuels production across the country, our programs to help produce clean electricity and smart grids and renewable energy. So there's billions of dollars that are being put to good use to help de-risk these types of investments so that Canada can keep producing or produce even more clean energy that will service not only our domestic emission reduction objectives, but also to service global markets for their clean energy needs.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Maloney, we're going to move to you, and you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank all of our witnesses for joining us today on the first of many days of this very interesting and incredibly important study. I had some concerns going into this study that we're starting today because, you know, the utopian view of the world is, I think everybody around this table would agree that what we want is an economy in a world where we all have good, high-paying jobs. We're all able to drive the kind of cars we want. We're all able to heat our homes and do all of these things at an affordable price. The only problem is we don't live in a utopian world. So we're in a situation here where we're talking about a just transition where we've got a whole variety of competing interests. And my concern was that this study was going to descend into a picking apart of little pieces of it here and there. And I think we've already started down that path. I'm probably going to do it myself at some point, so I'm not pointing fingers at anybody in particular, just to be clear. Part of the problem, in my view, is that when you start talking about this, you're using words like pathways, and you talk about principles, and you know, you use all of this other lingo that we constantly hear so much, and the average person doesn't understand what that means. I'm not sure some of the people using those words necessarily know what it means either, to be honest. So my question to you is, assuming my premise is correct that we all want to live in this utopian world, how do we approach this discussion using language that's going to appeal to people so that they understand it and they grasp it and buy into it? I didn't think anybody was going to jump at that one, but...
Perhaps one thing that I can say is that we are spending a lot of time talking to Canadians right now. We have put some texts, some proposals in front of them to seek their feedback. And I think what we hear from them is going to be important. We will hear from them whether or not the words make sense. We will hear from them whether or not the words are focusing on the right things. We will hear whether the actions are focusing on the right things. And so we will have a What We Heard report that is going to be published this summer, where we'll take all the information from the roundtables and the letters and the input that we've received to try and put together a summary of what Canadians are saying on this topic. So we are doing some work to understand some of the things that you are raising right now to make sure that it's meaningful and that we're moving in the right direction. We just need a bit more time to get through that process.
That's helpful because I want to get away from a situation where we have people, you know, hauling out reports that were too thin, and on the other hand, people saying, oh, politicians aren't telling the truth, and so on and so on. What I want to focus on is where are these jobs that are going to replace the ones that we have now? Because the reality is our economy is very reliant on the oil and gas sector. So can you tell me what the major growth areas, the fastest growth areas are in the clean energy field that can give some people some encouragement so they can see some light at the end of the tunnel?
I'm wondering if my colleagues from ESDC would like to take a start at that question.
So, Chris, I don't know if you're able to sort of jump in there in terms of some of the sectors that are growing or projected to grow the most over the next period of time.
Yeah, so we have a bit of data on that. So with the sectoral program, we put an emphasis on sectors like that are going to be significantly impacted by just transition. So the agriculture sector, the clean technology sector, construction, natural resources and environment, as well as the transportation sector. So we're looking at those from different perspectives. So just for example, with the construction sector, we know that building retrofits are going to substantially change some of the jobs and impact jobs. The people, we're going to need people to do all these retrofits that are planned, but they're actually going to be different skill sets. So just an example, like a pipe fitter, you're going to have to do different measures and construct that differently. So we're looking at how we successfully equip workers with the skills that they need to actually make that successful transition, as well as to ensure that we have workers in place to do those jobs.
Les, so I'll leave this ask on the table. Can you make it as simple as possible and as clear as possible and identify the areas of growth so people can understand it? Thank you.
Right on with our discussion. We're going to go over to Mr. Malilo, and you'll have 5 minutes for this round of questions and answers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for joining us today for this important conversation. I think we can all agree on that around the table. Part of the problem going so late in the rounds here is that a lot of what I wanted to ask has already been covered or close to have been covered. So that's a good point by my colleague there, my neighbor from northeastern Ontario. Not as well, so I'm going to ask my questions anyway. I suppose I will be directing them to natural resources, but if anyone else wants to jump in with comments, please feel free to do so. So picking up on a comment from my colleague, Mr. Bragdon, around rural communities, and I would extend as well northern communities and remote communities. What actions is the government taking to ensure that specifically northern rural communities aren't going to be as so badly displaced by this transition, given how much those regions rely on sectors like natural resources?
So perhaps I'll sort of come back to the principles upon which that we're trying to consult here on the just transition. So it's really about how is it that we should guide the kinds of decisions that we're going to need to make, the kinds of actions that we need to make as we move to a net zero future, both from a getting workers ready and minimizing impacts on communities and workers. So we need to understand what are the guideposts for us to know how to make the best decisions and what are the best actions to take when these types of things will happen, or how to best prepare for the types of jobs and activities that we need. So that's really where we are right now. And that includes Canadians from coast to coast to coast and communities from coast to coast to coast.
I appreciate that, and I don't remember if it was you, Ms. Scharf, or not, but somebody had mentioned that I believe it was 17,000 submissions throughout the consultation. Do you have, or are you able to provide to the committee, if you don't know off the top of your head, information on sort of a geographical breakdown of those submissions? I know I'd like to see, how many folks in Northern Ontario, for example, have been consulted so far.
I'm not sure if Rasheen has any of that information off the top, or if it's something that we'd have to get back to you on, or will be summarized in the What We Heard report.
Yeah, it will be summarized in the What We Heard report, but we can probably get back to the committee sooner than that. Our mailbox submissions period will end on April 30th, so we can do a summary of what's there now.
I appreciate that. Thank you. And I suppose a similar question. Mining is very important in my region, in northwestern Ontario. I think as well, many folks, including the Canadian Climate Institute, has identified mining as a key industry that is transition vulnerable. is there an estimate at this point of how many workers in the mining industry can be displaced as a result of, or may be displaced as a result of the just transition?
So I don't have a particular answer to that question unless my colleagues from ESDC are able to offer any insights into that. Perhaps there is one comment I would like to make. I know there's a question about displaced workers. I also just really want to emphasize that there are going to be new clean energy and associated industries that are built as part of the transition to net zero. A fantastic example in the mining field is critical minerals, of which another colleagues around the table asked for some information earlier on in the meeting, where we see a significant opportunity for growth. So there is going to be shifts that happen, and in those shifts, there's going to be a need for similar skill sets and sometimes different skill sets. And that's what's really important to understand so that we have the workers ready for the jobs that are to come.
Appreciate that. If I could pick up on that, I think a lot of the training that comes with mining is very specialized, very specific. You mentioned critical minerals. That's obviously a very important opportunity. Are there other industries, and I'll open this up again to anyone who has a comment, other industries specifically that you see as an opportunity for folks that are displaced from the mining sector specifically?
Great. Thanks for that question. And I'm going to turn to Chris to see if you can add anything else on that.
So I would just say that overall, Canada is very well positioned in the mining industry, and we're probably likely to benefit from things like renewable energy, transition to electrical vehicles, production of graphite, lithium, cobalt, all expected to increase as we make that transition. So I don't have any specific data with regards to the mining industry as a whole. Maybe, if we look at the forestry industry as well, that might be one as well that we would be expected to grow as well. But I think that's a whole part of it. It's really hard to predict some of the data for these specific industries.
Okay, we're out of time on that one. We're going to move over to Ms. DeBruce, and you'll have 5 minutes for your discussion, your questions, whatever you'd like to do. You have 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And it's been interesting just to hear all of the different ways that people have been coming to this question. And it's a big study for us. It's an important one, and I think there's one that Canadians care about deeply. As to how we're positioning ourselves as we transform our energy or towards clean energy. So one of the questions I had, speaking of clean energy, is based on a bit of my experience in Ontario, which is that we switched from coal-fired electricity, and that meant that we went literally from having 50 smog days a year on average to none, which is it's hard to really remember, what it was like to be able. There were days when you couldn't go outside if you had asthma, and now people can go out. But there has been work that our government has done on the transition towards sustainable jobs for people who worked in coal-fired electricity, and I'm wondering if you could speak about what were the lessons learned from that, and how that projects forward into the work that we're doing when we're talking about sustainable jobs now.
Thank you for the question. So perhaps I just want to start with one distinction between the coal phase out and where we find ourselves today. I often hear cod and coal mentioned side by side, but the idea is around coal is there was something that a regulation was going to cause the end of, or something to stop. And that is one particular context for which there was a task force, a series of recommendations that the government considered, and $185 million of funding that was put forward to help address some of the impacts associated with that. In the case of the energy transition, it's much, much more complicated, as you noted, but not only is it complicated in that it's bigger, but it's that government is not the only actor in the economy making decisions. And so the government may be writing policies or regulations that will have impacts on the economy, but private sector investors will also be making decisions that will have impact on the economy. And so while I think the Just Transition Task Force on coal did provide some good recommendations that the government considered very carefully, in this particular case, we have to see it as quite a bit broader. And it's not solely focused on stopping one thing. It's actually transitioning from certain things to other things, or perhaps doing things slightly differently, and reacting to a lot of decisions being made, but a lot of independent players and actors and governments domestically and internationally, because the decisions being made internationally are also going to impact Canada. So I think there's what to learn, but we also have to be careful to make sure the conditions of today are well understood as we go forward.
I don't know if someone from ESDC also had something to add to that. Okay. Nope. Nope. All right. Est-ce qu'il m'entend?
Can you hear me?
Oh, d'accord. So I was just, Mr. Brown, did you have something that you were going to add?
Well, I was going to say I didn't particularly have a response to what's been learned to date. I was really just going to say that in terms of supporting workers, I think that's really the focus that we've got in terms of being able to provide them with training, reskilling to be able to take on the new jobs or to adapt to the new jobs in the cleaner economy. And so that's really where our focus is, and really wanted to emphasize the fact that it's not something that we do on our own. We also work with provinces and territories. In fact, we provide about $3 billion annually to the provinces and territories to support training within their own jurisdictions. And that allows them to tailor the responses to employers and workers in their own jurisdictions in a way that the federal government may not be able to do.
Thanks. Don't have much time, but if I could go back to Ms. Scharf, because you had mentioned how we have a large diversity of players that come into play on the decisions that are going to be made and how things go forward. How can we look to bring people together in different regions from different industries and different positions to be able to help inform what we'll be doing going forward?
Thank you for the question. So in addition to all the things I've talked about today around just transition, the emissions reductions plan, we're also taking a perspective as we move forward from the emissions reduction plan to look at what are the regional economic opportunities that we have around the country that we can leverage to grow new industries, taking a bit more of a place-based approach. So this is another perspective that the federal government in partnership with provinces and territories would like to explore, so that we can be laser focused on building those economies of the future where every region has a comparative advantage. And then to be able to line up behind that, what are those sustainable jobs that will be built from those sectors and those industries? And then how do we bring the types of programs that ESDC and others have to bear to get those workers and communities ready? So, so that's another thing that we're looking at, to really look across the country and look regionally at what can be done for our economic advantage.
Thank you. That's all my time.
Monsieur Simard for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Ms. Scharf, I heard earlier my colleagues said to you that, I mean, I don't know what put words in his mouth, but he referred to utopia or utopian approach when he was talking about your efforts. We know that in some sectors there is a significant effect on public health, or, for example, the example of asbestos in Quebec, which has been abandoned, and the effect on health of asbestos. And there are a number of people who talk about a just transition, and environmentalists say that you have to plan for replacing production. And is this kind of analysis or thought part of what you're trying to do with regard to the act you're preparing?
Thank you for the question. So I think plans like the emissions reduction plan, which has a number of measures and activities that will give us pathways to net zero, the work we'd like to do on place-based strategies regionally that will help grow new industries. This is all the type of intelligence, as has been asked, where are those new jobs? Where are the jobs going to be? That will help us understand the directions we need to take. And then the just transition legislation and the work that we're doing will help bring the types of principles and approaches that we need to consider to then take decisions on how to bring the right skills and the workers to the jobs of the future. So that's really how the two pieces fit together.
I have the impression, if I look at the statistics, I know that Canada is one of the poorest in the G7 with regard to investments in renewable energy. But I don't see how we can plan for a just transition and creating work jobs if we don't plan for the replacement of a carbon-based economy. Is that part of your efforts in planning the transition and to support low carbon activities?
Thank you for the question. So the work we're doing around just transition is really focused on how do we make sure we have an equitable and prosperous future as we transition to net zero. There is also an emissions reduction plan that provides a blueprint sector by sector for how we're going to get from here to our 2030 climate targets and set us on the path to net zero. So the just transition is really about how do we make sure we have the right skills, the right workers, that we're minimizing impacts on communities and helping to bring everyone along as we're making that transition to a net zero economy, which is outlined in the climate plan that we have available.
Thank you. And now, Mr. Angus, you'll get your last 2.5 minutes. It's over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as I'm extremely well known as Mr. Congeniality here in the chamber and all across parts of Canada, I am going to give my time to our guest that comes here every week faithfully and let him ask some questions. So over to the Greens.
Thank you, Mr. Angus. I want to start by recognizing the incredible work that organizations like the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives have already done to go beyond the talk of principles and get into specifics. As I'm sure witnesses know, they put together a report back in last April calling for very specific legislation and funding for a just transition fund, a just transition benefit for affected workers, calling for a just transition territorial and provincial transfer in the order of $16.5 billion. Now, what we've also seen is last week, as has been referred to a few times, a so-called emissions reduction plan that includes in it a new tax credit for carbon capture, a subsidy in the order of $50 billion. And so my question is about pace of how we intend on and can transition to in this just transition and support affected workers. And specifically, I'm curious if any witnesses can comment on the impact that further subsidizing oil and gas industry at the tune of $50 billion a year, how does that affect any plans towards a just transition for workers? Can any witnesses comment on that?
This is Debbie Scharf from Natural Resources Canada. What I can say is when it comes to just transition, there is definitely a need to balance urgency. And I think there's an understanding that there's a need to move swiftly on climate action, but also to balance that with the need to take time to consult Canadians. And there's absolutely a tension point there. But I've mentioned the word social dialogue several times in my discourse over the last hour and a half. And that's because Canadians care very deeply about this issue, as do parliamentarians and others, because it really is very central to us as human beings. And so we're trying to get the balance right between the urgency, but also taking the time to consult.
Thank you for that. I think I have 20 seconds left. Can I then ask a follow-up? Are you concerned at all when you hear of a subsidy at that scale from a public service point of view? To what extent do you feel like that would slow down our progress towards a just transition, if at all?
All I can comment on is what we're trying to accomplish with our work around just transition, which is hearing from Canadians about how we could best get this right.
Great, thank you. Now, Mr. McGuire, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
I'm just going to secede to my colleague.
Oh, okay.
Mr. McLean.
Yes, thank you for that, my colleague. I'm going to go back, Ms. Scharf. We started on this about 800,000 Canadians that are going to be displaced, the people that are producing goods in Canada. We haven't even talked about agriculture and how that's going to be affected here, and I presume that's in addition to the 800,000. But the report that you refer to talks about 640,000 new jobs, subsidized jobs, in these new clean energy economies. So we're going to lose 800,000 plus. We're going to make all our industries inefficient. We're going to gain 640. Can you please show me how that math goes around? It's not a hard question, sorry.
It's not that it's not a hard question. I'm just having a bit of trouble following where all of these numbers are coming from.
So the 640 is in your report, Clean Energy Canada's New Reality Report that you quote when you spoke today. And the 800,000 was in the report we got here. About 70% of Canada's goods exports, employing 800,000 Canadians, will be affected by this transition.
So I have not read either of those report in great detail. I would perhaps.
But yet you quote it. You quote it in your report here.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So it's just it's a headline for you as opposed to an actual understanding.
No, that's not it. The reason why I quoted the Clean Energy Canada report as well as the RBC analysis was to provide some indications around the types of modeling that has been done in Canada around the types of opportunities that could be coming in the clean energy transition, as well as those reports being places where evidence and analysis could be brought to bear for this particular committee to look at where those opportunities may be.
Well, thank you very much. Let's go back to some of what you've raised here in your, and I appreciate that some of my colleagues have noted that there are words here that don't mean anything to anybody. They're just kind of strung together phrases on paper, and we do need to analyze these to see where Canadians are going, because they are used to seeing us, the officials in Ottawa, continue to say things that they cannot deliver on. Words coming out people's mouths. And the way they affect people's lives are two different things. So I do know here you talk about smart investors know the opportunity of the future will need to be low carbon. Okay, well, where are the smart investors making money today, if I may ask? Just for a quick one. I think that the smart investors you're talking about are the ones that are being pushed by government to disinvest in actually profitable and sustainable industries. Any comment?
So the reference to smart investors is referring to there are a number of markets and industries that are growing significantly across the globe. I can quote you a few stats off the top of my head, looking at critical minerals, hydrogen, clean power production, where there's billions of dollars of investment that's moving in that space because they do offer the opportunity to provide low and zero carbon energy. So investors are making decisions to move into those industries.
Smart investors go counter-cyclical as opposed to cyclical, and they don't follow the herd, but we'll go through that some other time. You do talk in here about, in your report, the energy transition ahead of us is not about phasing out any industry. It's about industry making changes, reducing carbon intensity, and finding new ways to adapt to the changing market. And I think that's where industry wants us to be, and I appreciate that you put that in your report. But then you jump 3 points later to this. We know that some who work in high carbon intensity industry will lose their jobs, but we also know that the Canadian workers who built our current energy system have the know-how, the ingenuity, the work ethic that will see them thrive in green energy jobs. Now, these green energy jobs, speak about any idea what those are at this point in time?
So I believe we've gotten to that question. Oh, I'm sorry, I hear an echo of myself. Hello?
I think you're good. We're not getting an echo unless you're finding it distracting.
Yes, okay, thank you. It's actually been fixed. Thank you very much. So we have talked about that, I think, several times over this line of questioning about where those clean energy jobs or green jobs are, talking about zero emission vehicles and clean power production and clean energy like hydrogen production and biofuels, critical minerals. These are going to be the types of industries, trades, construction, where we're going to see those jobs being created.
Okay.
And I would like to point out that
I do bristle at this sort of, we're going to run towards green mining. If I have a few extra seconds here, Mr. Chair, because there was that echo there, I appreciate it. You do talk about the Atlantic Loop, the Clean Fuels Fund, without mentioning the GHG footprint associated with clean fuels, so-called clean fuels. You also talk about sustainability here. And when I was in the IEA, Jennifer Granholm had the same narrative that you have here, which is effectively that there's more jobs paying more money, but there's no cost to the consumer at the end of the day. I'm going to suggest that's a narrative and math that doesn't work. This will be much more expensive if the utopia that you're talking about of better jobs, paying more, is actually on the horizon. This is actually going to cost Canadians a lot of money. Thank you.
And I'll say we're at the end of time for that round, but I will give we have a bit of time on the clock here. So if anybody would like to respond to that sort of the closing statement there, I'm willing to give you the floor before we go to our final questioner for this afternoon. And seeing none, nobody rushing for the mic. It's not like we're in a game show, I guess. But I will then go to Mr. Shahal, who will have his 5 minutes for our what I believe will be our final round of questions here, given the time.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for joining us today and the great conversation on this very important topic. We're having this topic because in many provinces across the country, we haven't taken diversification seriously. And Alberta, where is home to me, is a prime example. We've kind of lived off the great revenues that the energy sector has provided, but we haven't invested back into our communities with new jobs and economic diversification. So this is a great opportunity to continue to make Alberta and Western Canada an energy leader. And I think energy leader of all things energy is what we should be focusing on. The great aspects of our economy that's still going to provide us a lot of energy for many years to come, but also focusing on growing other sources of energy, which are going to be critical to meeting our goals, but making sure we have a diversified and sustainable economy. So I think my first question, we're looking at Germany and some of the other nations that have preceded us on this just transition and getting off coal. What are some lessons learned? And I read in the report that they talk a little bit about focusing on regional economic development rather than direct financial supports. So is that the approach we're taking here, or are we looking to a combination of both to meet our goals with the transition?
So perhaps what I can say is there's been a lot of investment and there continues to be investment to help build up the types of industries that we need to bring jobs and prosperity to Canada. And I take your point about different regions of the country having different comparative advantages. And I think that that's something that we need to leverage as a country to build the types of clean energy industries we need in the future and to have that help inform the types of jobs that we're going to need to bring to bear to be able to service those industries for economic prosperity. And so that is one of the things that we are thinking of as a government, is how to work with all of the provinces and territories to be able to look at economic growth from a comparative advantage perspective. What does it mean for Alberta? What does it mean for British Columbia? What does it mean for Ontario? What does it mean for Newfoundland? And then how do we line up the types of jobs behind that? So while that is something that's happening parallel and in complement to what we're trying to accomplish with the just transition legislation, it is absolutely an important part of how we think about building the type of sustainable jobs we want as a country.
That's great. Thank you for that. And I think Mr. Bates talked a little bit about the Clean Jobs Training Center earlier. And I know with the Future Skills Center, the Clean Jobs Training Center, talking to many businesses here, they'll say that as they've transitioned to find new employees in the tech sector, it's because we had such skilled labor from the oil and gas sector. So I guess, can you talk about how our focus on those Future Skills Center have been augmented or changed, and the success of the Edge Up program specifically? And I directed that towards Mr. Bates, but if somebody else wants to answer that, go ahead.
So those are not programs that Edge Up that I'm familiar, nor do I think it's under ESTC's portfolio. One thing that hasn't been mentioned here much that kind of relates to it and what we're trying to do though is engaging with employers. So recognizing the important role that employers will play in this and how we support employers to make that successful transition and make sure that they have the skills and talent that they need to actually prepare for and succeed and be a competitive advantage in the just transition. But I'm not too sure if any of my NRCan colleagues know about the specific program referenced.
Edge Up is an initiative of the Future Skills Center that was a pilot that I believe that they're now going to expand to other jurisdictions. But initially, it was looking at helping oil workers who had been laid off in Alberta to find new jobs in the technology and IT sector.
Thank you for that. Are you able to expand, Ms. Reid, on you're saying it was a pilot, and because of the success that it's being expanded, can you talk about some of the positive outcomes from that program and where it's being expanded?
I would have to defer questions for more information to my colleagues. The Future Skills Centers would be a great witness for the committee to call.
All right. Well, Future Skills Center, we'll love to have you here to have a conversation on some of the great work that's happening through there. Now, with Germany and specifically, the analyst report identified some shortcomings with, I guess, Germany's just transition and how they worked with various stakeholders. So what have we done to make sure that with our just transition that we are, I guess, better prepared to communicate with all stakeholders and many of those who haven't traditionally had a voice at the table through this transition?
And I'll say we're out of the time here, but if somebody would like to give a brief answer on that, that would be appreciated. Thank you.
I think that would be Rasheen Reid who would need to comment on that.
Yeah, so we have developed a fairly extensive stakeholder list, and we've scheduled, I think we're going to have a total of 15 sessions with stakeholders that would include employers, so industry utilities, NGOs, academics, youth, coal communities that are already in transition and that have been benefiting from the Canada Coal Transition Initiative, as well as unions and workers.
And that takes us to the end of the rounds that we have for questions. We're at 5:22, but there's not going to be enough time to just a second, Charlie, because it's a point of order.
Yeah, just on, before our witnesses leave us.
Sure. Yeah, if you can make your comment then, and I was going to thank the witnesses, provide some summary statements, and then I have a couple of items to get to.
Yes, sorry, quickly, in my first round of questions, I'd asked about whether or not the department would be doing an analysis of the IPCC recommendations as compared to what the government plans are, and if they would be able to table any analysis with our committee.
Okay, noted, and I'll be working with the clerk to pull out a number of the items that were asked for from the officials who are with us today, and we'll be sending that off for input, so thank you. I wanted to thank all of the officials for providing your updates, providing your responses, for being here with us today. As the first session on this new study, I think it gives us a sense of some of the work that you're doing now. I appreciated hearing about some of the consultations. I know I'll be working with my team to push out there the study with the the consultation with the April 30th deadline. I'm sure others like Mr. Malula will make sure that his constituents are also given a chance to provide some input. And so thank you for being here with us today. Just if you, there's really nothing further for the witnesses, but I do have for the members. So if the witnesses want to jump off now, thank you for being here, and we may, I guess, hear from you again before we're finished this this study, which will include up to 9 more sessions. So yeah, either you can leave now, or we'll be wrapping up in just a minute here. So for the members, just a quick update that on Wednesday, April 6th, we'll have Ministers Wilkinson and Guilbeault and officials from the Canada Energy Regulator appearing on our study of a greenhouse gas emissions cap for the oil and gas sector. The notice for that meeting has been posted, and we are setting aside 15 minutes at the end of that day. The ministers are here, as I say, for an hour. There may or may not be a vote on Wednesday after question period, so we'll get started as soon as we can. The ministers have indicated that they'll have about an hour to be with us, so we'll get through and until officials. But the last 15 minutes, we will have drafting instructions for the analysts so that they can then start writing the report. There also an update when we return from the 2 weeks at home. The plan is to have our first Monday meeting to continue this study with witnesses that will be getting your lists by this Friday. And then the second hour, we'd like to go back to hopefully finishing off the Emissions Reduction Fund report. And so we'll spend that second hour on the report. So come with your comments ready to go on that. And then on a technical matter, I learned that we needed a motion to provide catering for the Finnish delegation that we've already fed and watered. And but in order to tie things up with a nice bow on that, what's that?
His ID, he can pay.
Otherwise, if somebody would be so kind as to giving me a motion to provide refreshments for the Finnish delegation, we could dispense with that. So
we have a Finnish home. Yeah.
Okay, James will move it. Anybody, all in favor?
Yeah.
All good. Okay, thank you for that, and I'm sure the Finnish delegation also appreciates it. And then we'll go to Mr. Angus and Mr. McGuire. Did you have something as well?
Yeah, I'm Chair. I thank you. I think it all makes sense to me and what you've laid out. My question is I thought we were getting an hour with Minister Guilbeault and an hour with Minister Wilkinson, not an hour together, and I find that somewhat problematic.
That it was a request from the ministers to have them together, and I know that they have a hard stop where we weren't able to get them until 5:30. And so this is going to be we'll make sure that we have the full hour with them for whatever time we get started on Wednesday. And if we can push it a little bit beyond, I'll try to do that. I think it is important that we hear from both ministers, and so they will be here. Okay, Mr. McGuire.
Well, ironically, we might have read each other's minds. I felt that it was the same thing. I thought we were getting them each for an hour, Mr. Chair, and I think that that's if one of them can come and we have to have another one another day, then I think we should still do that as 1 hour. That was the agreement we had, 1 hour with each minister, or both of them here for the 2 hours. One wants to be here for an hour and one for the other. I'm fine with that too, but I think it's important that there's been a lot of information come down from the government in the last few days, even a week in this information, and I think it would be kind of pertinent to have us have the opportunity, all of us, to get a little more detail on the type of questioning that is out there. And I think it's this is the first that I heard that we weren't going to have them for 2 hours.
I appreciate the comments. We've reached out. We've asked for availability. This is what we have. Like I say, I will try to get every minute of the hour. And but I guess the other thing is, we have a fairly ambitious work plan between now and the end of June. We would like to move into drafting instructions on Wednesday so that the analysts, as we're away for 2 weeks, can then start on their work on the report. And everything that we defer just is going to push us further down the line. So, like I say, we reached out to the ministers. We requested. This is what they've come back with for as far as availability. And so we'll try to run it as quickly as we can and as efficiently to make sure that we have as much time for questions and answers as possible. Mr. McGuire.
Well, I find that unacceptable. We've got lots of time between now and the end of June for the ministers to appear about this study. We're going to have them for estimates and other things, I know, as well. But there's lots of time between now and, if they can't make it, I mean, perhaps we ask them if they could be here on Wednesday. I don't know if that was the specific ask or not. I think we should ask them when they are available and when they can appear before the committee, because I think it's very important that the two of them get here for an hour each at least, or 2 hours together. I know that's probably more difficult. But I think in regards to a study that's, what are we, 10, 12 weeks long, that there should be time in there for the two ministers to appear at some point. So I request that we continue to search that out with the two ministers and try to have them appear before the committee without making it a motion, Mr. Chair.
I'll work with the clerk to go back and see what we can get, and they are both going to be here on Wednesday, and we'll anyway I'll put the question and see what we get back. But I know they're limited; they have limited availability as well. Yeah, no, fair enough. Monsieur Simard.
Ce serait peut-être.
I think it would be important when we make this kind of a change, because myself and others, we both thought that we would have each minister for an hour. And when there's this kind of a change, I think we have to be informed before being presented with a fait accompli. And this will help us to plan. Maybe we could have Mr. Guilbeault first and then Mr. Wilkinson, but to have a fait accompli like this, that's quite unfortunate.
Invitations to ministers are always invitations, and they come when they can for how long they can. I was always under the impression that we had the ministers for 1 hour. In any event, it's now 5:30. This is not committee business. I suggest we adjourn and move on. Thank you.
Well, point of order, Mr. Chair. It is, you've dropped on us some news that what we thought was an agreement about ministers coming here for an hour each, in fact, are coming for a combined 1 hour, so half an hour each. So I do think that it's something we should discuss here and come to conclusion on about how we meet that one way or another before we adjourn today.
The comment that I'll make is that we have invited the ministers. The ministers let us know when they're available. They've come back and said this is what they can offer. As I said, I'm happy to go back to them. We have a day to see how much of the 2 hours we can try to get with them. And I've been told that they do have things they need to move on to, but I don't know what that sort of drop dead time is on Wednesday. So we'll go back, we'll find out, and we'll do everything. I have Mr. Angus first before Mr. McLean.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. I'll say it again. This is not committee business. I move to
is
adjourn the
committee
meeting.
business.
All we can do, the chair has indicated that he will invite the ministers again. Having done this myself in the past, all you can do is extend an invitation. You don't control the answer. So I will say again, I move to adjourn the motion.
With the motion to adjourn, then we need to call a vote. So all in favor? Of adjourning. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Charlie?
I don't want to lose Wednesday, so we'll fight this on another day, and I will fight it on another day, but I don't want to lose Wednesday with the minute.
Okay, so that's 6. So we're adjourned. Thank you.
you.